Opening, shadows after the storm, the bells tolled, and then silence. In the aftermath of the Black Death, Europe was a continent of ghosts. Empty villages, fields overgrown with weeds, churches echoing with prayers that went unanswered. But the plague did not vanish with its victims. Its true terror lay not in the dying, but in what it left behind. It reshaped every layer of society. It crushed kingdoms and gave birth to rebellions. It shattered faith and sowed seeds of doubt that would blossom centuries later. And it carved scars so deep that even now, in our world of medicine and science, we still hear its whisper. This is the legacy of the Black Death. Part I, Demographic Collapse. A silent apocalypse imagined standing at the edge of a village in 1350. No voices, no laughter of children, only the moaning of crows. The Black Death had carved through the population like a scythe, cutting down nearly half of Europe. In some towns, 9 out of 10 souls were gone. Houses collapsed into ruin, their doors still locked as if waiting for families who would never return. Fields lay barren. There were not enough living hands to harvest, not enough priests to bury, not enough tears left to cry. Chroniclers described entire regions turning into graveyards. The living were not sufficient to bury the dead, wrote one monk, and so the wolves of the forest grew fat. The silence itself became an enemy. Survivors spoke of walking for days without encountering another soul. Villages seemed cursed, haunted by the invisible weight of death. What happens when the hum of humanity vanishes overnight? The world itself feels hollow. The plague had not merely killed, it had erased communities. It had erased memory. In this silence, this void would have consequences more devastating than the plague itself. Part 2. The economy of bones. With so many dead, the very foundation of medieval society cracked. Before the plague, peasants lived chained to the land, bound by feudal lords and ancient contracts. But now, the dead had left behind something rare: opportunity. The survivors were suddenly valuable. A single pair of working hands could mean the difference between famine and survival for a lord's estate. Peasants, once powerless, discovered they could demand higher wages. Some abandoned their fields entirely, moving to towns and cities in search of better lives. But power does not shift without resistance. The nobles, terrified of losing control, tried to lock society back into place. In England, the Crown issued the Statute of Labourers in 1351 in an attempt to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It was an act of desperation, an attempt to chain the living to the corpses of the past. But the world had changed. The peasants had tasted freedom. They would not forget it. In 1381, a storm broke loose, the peasants' revolt. Tens of thousands marched on London, demanding justice, demanding the right to live as free men rather than serfs. The rebellion was crushed in blood, but the old system of feudalism had received a mortal wound. The plague had minted new fortunes as well. With land abandoned, the clever and ruthless snatched up property. Merchants rose, nobles fell. Entire dynasties were reconfigured by death. It was an economy of bones, wealth built atop the graves of the fallen. Part 3. Faith in Ruins. The Black Death was not only a crisis of bodies, but of souls. The people had turned to the church for salvation, for explanation, for comfort. But the priests had died like the rest. Bishops fled cities, monasteries became tombs, prayers went unanswered. If holy men could not protect themselves, what protection was there for the common man? Faith cracked, and in the cracks, darker things grew. Some believed the plague was God's punishment, and so they sought to atone through pain. Across Europe, bands of flagellants appeared, men who whipped themselves bloody as they marched through villages, chanting hymns of doom. At night, the sound of whips striking flesh echoed like drums of the apocalypse. Others turned their rage outward. Jews were blamed for poisoning wells, for summoning demons, for conspiring with the devil. Pogroms erupted, entire Jewish communities burned alive, drowned, torn apart by mobs who were desperate to find a scapegoat for their suffering. The church, weakened and humiliated, tried to restore its grip. Yet seeds of doubt had been sown. For the first time in centuries, people began to ask, if the church cannot explain this, then who can? That question would smolder for generations, until it erupted in the Reformation. But its spark was lit here in the ruins of faith after the Black Death. Part 4. Shadows and power. While peasants fought for wages and faith withered, kings and rulers saw opportunity in the chaos. The plague had reduced populations, but it had also reduced resistance. Monarchs consolidated power, centralizing their rule over lands suddenly emptied of their nobility. The balance of medieval Europe shifted. Stronger states emerged, states that would one day shape the modern world. But the shadows of rebellion lingered. Desperate governments passed harsh laws to control labor, wages, and movement. Spies were sent to sniff out sedition. Rebels were hanged, drawn, and quartered in public squares. At the same time, war did not stop. Even as bodies rotted in the fields, kings raised armies to fight each other, dragging the survivors of plague into yet more slaughter. The 100 Years' War raged on, a grim reminder that human ambition does not die even when half of humanity does. The plague had thinned the herd, but those who survived did not emerge united. They emerged sharpened, ambitious, ruthless. Out of the ashes of plague, the outlines of the modern nation-state began to take form, built with iron, blood, and fear. Part 5. The long black legacy. The plague did not simply end. Its shadows stretched for centuries. Art became haunted. Paintings and carvings depicted skeletons, dancing with the living, the macabre dance macabre, reminding everyone that death was always waiting. In literature, stories of pestilence and judgment spread, cementing the idea that life was fleeting, fragile, and cruel. Medicine, too, began to shift. The plague had shown the limits of prayer and superstition. Slowly, painfully, the idea of studying disease, of looking for natural causes instead of divine punishment, began to take hold. The roots of modern science were watered with the blood of plague victims, and in memory, the Black Death became a permanent scar. It was spoken of in whispers, as though naming it might summon it again. Every new outbreak of plague carried echoes of the Great One, echoes that shaped policy, fear, and imagination. Even today, when pandemics strike, historians and doctors alike look back to the 14th century, to the graves of Europe, to the silence of its villages for lessons. The Black Death was not just a medieval tragedy. It was a turning point, a reordering of the world. Closing, echoes of the plague. The bells that rang for the dead have long since fallen silent. The weeds have grown over the mass graves. The bones of the forgotten lie scattered beneath the soil. But the plague never truly died. It lingers in the systems we live under, in the doubts we carry, in the art we create. Its legacy is written not only in history books, but in us. Because the Black Death was not just about death. It was about what came after. The silence, the shadows, and the world that rose from them.